Are we videoing, right? Okay. All right. We actually, Eddie's cat turned that off. So, not good. Um, we just talked for like, what, 15, 20 more minutes?
Mhm.
All right. So, yeah. Nietzsche is going to come off like a racist. People that love Nietzsche are going to say he's not being racist. He's actually just being historically accurate about the origin of good. Other people, racist people, are actually going to take this text and do racist things with them, right? And then there are others who just view it as racist without sympathizing that he's correct, right?
Or has any correct aspects.
Yes, 100%, right. They're just going to think he's completely just full of it,
Mhm. And
right?
then there's people in the middle
Uh,
probably somewhere.
yeah, there's people in the middle, right?
There's some racism.
Yeah, and so, gosh dang, I'm trying to think about what did we,
Well, I mean, we just talked about, I mean, Nietzsche is a hot topic, right? And that some people, we're in a time and space right now that we know that uh, it's a big controversy.
right?
Anti-Semitism, right?
Anti-Semitism is a big deal right now,
No
especially
matter what
because
side you're on.
I don't think we said this already, but especially because Nick Cannon says a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Nick Cannon gives nothing but historical fan fiction. Nothing Nick Cannon says is historically correct, right? But Nietzsche's given a version that has the same sentiments that might actually be historically correct, right? So I guess we're given the big steroid version of Nietzsche's. I mean, of Nick Cannon's
Mm-hmm.
speech, right?
And
So
if you're watching this in the fall,
yes, if you're watching this in the fall, right? Oh no, we only said that
Nick Cannon came out and said something.
because I said what happened with Nick Cannon like 2 days ago,
Yeah.
but that won't be 2 days ago in the fall. So okay, yeah. If I show this in the fall, if we watch this in the fall, then just know that this convo is taking place in the summer, right?
The reading.
Okay, yes. So we're just gonna hop in and read. Yeah. Oh shoot, we can talk about goodness. So remember that this is going to be Nietzsche trying to get at the origin of the term good. And Nietzsche is lecturing, so it's probably good because I did this during the reading. Nietzsche has found himself in a really particular time, a time in which moral atheism is really taking off in Europe, especially Central Europe, right, in which Germany is a big part of, and especially utilitarianism, which is also a secular moralism in Europe, right? Nietzsche hates these things, and he thinks that they are completely misguided. Yeah, and they're misguided because we think that goodness was talked about in terms of utility, when it was actually not in its origin talked about utility, but instead talked about goodness was about character in the same way that Aristotle talked about it, right? That goodness was more of a biological term, right? It was more of a
And he said, I mean, if you've reached the potential
yes,
of what
if you, right, in which your material is a part of, right, come to full potential form, then you've become good. That it's a matter of character, not a matter of utility, although utility comes after.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not utility the source of goodness, but
a byproduct of it.
a byproduct of it. Right? Nietzsche is going to agree with this, and he's going to point out why our notion of goodness now, especially when we talk about it in the terms of when we talk about goodness in the Judeo way, in the Christian way, it's misguided, 100%. It's actually that's a perversion of the word good. Right. Okay. So let me hop back in there, and this is actually a translation that I've never. This is the first time me reading this translation. And while I did pick out the sections of on the genealogy of morality, I picked out what sections we're going to read. I've never read this translation, but it seems a lot more common English than the one I wanted in there. So bear with me while I stumble through the reading. Right. Okay. So you have to respect a good spirits which preside, and read along with me. So you have to respect a good spirits which preside in these historians of morality, but it is an unfortunate fact that that historical spirit itself is lacking in them. They have been left in the lurk by all the good spirits of history itself. As is now established philosophical practice, they all think in a way that is essentially unhistorical. So we think about goodness, historians talk about the nature of good in a way that's unhistorical. And this is actually true. If you look at people that talk about Alexander the Great, we talk about Alexander the Great like he's like the worst person that's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
But that's actually not historically how it was back then.
Yeah.
Like Alexander the Great would run through people, run through towns, and they would love him because we had a different nature of good, right? And when we think about what it, like how good came to be, right? When we think about how history of goodness gets done, right? Nietzsche's pointing out, yeah, I mean, that's actually, it's unhistorical the way history treats the nature of good, right? So he says, this can't be doubted. The idiocy of the moral genealogy is revealed at the outset when it is a question of conveying the descent of the concept and judgment of good. Originally, they decree unegoistic acts were praised. So this is probably how you learn about what. Yes, this is probably how you learn about what goodness is in your psychology classes. That there were unegoistic acts were praised and called good by their recipients. In other words, by people to whom they were useful. Later, everyone forgot the origin of the praise, and because such acts had been habitually praised as good, people also began to experience them as good, as if there were something good as such. We can see at once. This first deduction contains all the typical traits of idiosyncratic English psychologist. We have usefulness, forgetting, habit, finally, error as the basis of a respect for values, which the higher man has hitherto been proud, as though it were a sort of general privilege of mankind. This pride must be humbled. This evaluation devalued. Has that been achieved? So Eddie, what's going on here?
I mean, it sounds like he's basically saying people deemed good as if they were the recipient of something. Like
right. That we think, oh, when you treat me nice, I like you and I call you good.
Yeah.
That must have been where the word good came from.
Or if you're being selfless in some way and it benefited me, that
right.
That
Nietzsche is saying something actually true here. That's not the origin of the word good. Right. That when we talked about good, we're talking this Aristotelian version of good, right? Where it's about your character, not about the things that you're doing per se. Yeah, but it's not the character that us in our Christian West or Islamic West want to say it is. Yeah. Now for me, it is obvious. Whoops. It is obvious. Where is this? Gosh dang it! I moved the thing. Now for me, it is obvious that the real breeding ground for the concept of good has been sought and located in the wrong place by this theory. The judgment good does not emanate from those to whom goodness is shown. Instead, it has been the good themselves, meaning the noble, the mighty, the high, the high-placed and high-minded who saw and judged themselves and their actions of good, meaning first-rate in contrast to everything lowly, low-minded, commonplace, and plebeian, right? So those that were powerful and noble were the first ones to use the word good, and they were talking about themselves. And everything that was the opposite of them, everything that was common and plebeian and low-minded, that was what's the antithesis of good? Bad, right. Yeah. It was from this pathos of distance that they claimed the right to create values. So these values are created and give these values names. Usefulness was none of their concern, so he's totally racking on utilitarianism, which I'll link a video to what utilitarianism is before the video starts, before you guys watch this. Gosh damn, we gotta get through this. Where the heck am I? Oh yeah, the standpoint of usefulness is as alien and as inappropriate as it can be to such a heated eruption of the highest rank ordering and rank defining value judgment. This is the point where the feeling reaches the opposite of low temperatures needed for any calculation of prudence or reckoning of usefulness, and not just once before the exceptional moment, or for the exceptional moment, but permanently. The pathos of nobility and distance, as I have said, the continuing and predominant feeling of complete fundamental superiority of a higher ruling kind in relation to a lower kind, to those below, that is the antithesis of good and bad. Let me get past this parentheses. It is because of this origin that from the outset the word good is absolutely not necessarily attached to unegotistic actions. As the superstition of these moral genealogists would have it. On the contrary, it is only with a decline of aristocratic value judgments that this whole antithesis between egoistic and unegoistic forces itself more and more on man's conscience. It is, to use my language, the herd instinct which, with that, finally gets its word and makes words. Gets its word in and makes words. And even then, it takes long enough for the instinct to finally become sufficiently dominant for the valuation of moral values to become enmeshed and embedded in the antithesis, right? As in the case in temporary Europe, for example, the prejudice which takes normal, unegotistic, and disinterested as equivalent terms already rules with the powers of a fixed idea and mental illness, right?
Wait, so is he basically trying to say you can only be good if you are competent?
That the origin of the word good had nothing to do with being selfless.
Okay.
Had nothing to do with being selfless. That it's not like when we talk about how did good get started, it wasn't when we sit there and we psychoanalyze the language instead of looking up, because I mean Nietzsche is he's a language expert. In fact, he's at the time he's alive, he's one of the most prominent language experts, right? I think he was fluent in like Greek before the age of, I don't know, sometime before the end of his teenage years, right? He is a genius, right? Yeah, that this sort of like, oh well, the word goodness got created because we liked the way we treated each other, and so we just called it good. And if you didn't like it, then the group got together and beat your ass. That's actually not what happened. That the word good was actually, there was a select few that whooped everyone else's ass, and then they got control over the words, right? And they called themselves good. And anyone that was different than them, all the common people must have been bad. But this isn't a derogatory word, right? It's not actually moral per se. It's just descriptive. But he says this in a minute. Okay, so 4, I was given the pointer in the right direction by the question as to what the terms for good, as used in different languages, mean, and an etymological point of view, right? Then I found that they all led me back to the same conceptual transformation, that everywhere noble, aristocratic, and social termism, the basic concept from which necessarily good in the sense of spiritual, noble, um, aristocratic, of spiritually high-minded, spiritually privileged, developed a development that always runs parallel with with that other one, which ultimately transforms common, plebeian, and low into the concept of bad. So the best examples of the latter is the German word, um, bad itself, right? Which is identical with another German word, which means plain and simple. Compare plainly, right, and simple, and originally referred to simple, the common man with no derogatory implication, but simply in contrast to the nobility, right? So if we look at like the origin of the word good or the origin of the word bad, it looks a lot like common or simple, and this is never how we would talk about someone who's successful in the hierarchy of society, right? So around about, dang, I've never read this version of it, and it's tripping my eyes up. Well, I mean the Germans, I've never been able to like read the German, right? So, right around about the time of the 30 Years' War, late enough, then this meaning shifted to its current usage, and the current usage is referring to being good as being selfless and unegoistic,
being able to be useful,
being able to be a servant to other people, right? To me, this seems an essential insight into the moral genealogy, that it has been discovered so late due to its obstructing influence, which the democratic bias within the modern world exercises over all questions of descent. And this is the case in which the apparently most objective fields, natural science and physiology, I shall just mention here. The havoc this prejudice can wreak, once it is unbridled to the point of hatred, particularly for the morality and history, can be seen in the famous case of Buckle, the plebeianism of the modern spirit, which began in England, talking John Stuart Mill sort of, broke out there once again on its native soil as violently, not John Stuart Mill, sorry, as violently as a volcano of mud, with that salted, overlad, vulgar, how would you say this word?
No idea.
Loquacity, which all the volcanoes have spoken up till now. Yeah, this is a weird translation. Okay, you will have already guessed how easy it was for the priestly method of evaluation to split off from the chivalric aristocratic method and then develop into the opposite of the latter. So now we're going to talk about this switch. So at the origin of things, any sort of words that would be applied to someone in the aristocratic class, like powerful, well, he's going to get into this in a second, powerful, competent, sexual competency, right? Any power, I mean, the closer you get to power, the more essential the virtue is going to be. We still do that today. Yes, yes. Yeah. Okay, we'll get to that. Right. So he's going to say you will have already guessed how easy it was for the priestly method of evaluation to split off from the chivalric aristocratic method, and then to develop further into the opposite of the latter. This receives special impetus when the priestly caste and the warrior caste confront one another. Where the heck am I? This game keeps reloading. Okay. When the priestly caste and the warrior caste confront one another in jealousy and cannot agree on the prize of war, the chivalric aristocratic value judgments are based on powerful physicality, a blossoming, rich, even effervescent good health, that includes the need to maintain it: war, adventure, hunting, dancing, jousting, and everything else that contains strong, free, happy action. These things were considered good, right? Um, the priestly aristocratic method of evaluation, as we've seen, has a different criteria. Man, that's a weird thing. Wait, woe betide when it comes to war. As we know, priests make most priests. Here we go. As we know, priests make the most evil enemies, but why? Because they are the most powerless. Out of this powerlessness, their hate swells into something huge and uncanny to a most intellectual and poisonous level. So because the lower class gets dominated so severely, um, it makes them so full of hate that the hate or the resentment, it manifests itself in an intellectualism. Okay, and this makes the priest the most dangerous enemies, right? Um, the greatest haters in world history and the most intelligent have always been priests.
Oh,
No,
LeBron here.
yeah, LeBron haters, right? Yeah, they are haters, but they're correct. Uh, have been priests. Nobody else's intelligence, Geist, stands a chance against the intelligence of priestly revenge. The history of mankind would be far too stupid a thing if it had not had the intellect of the powerless interjected into it. Let us take the best example straight away. Nothing has been done on earth against the noble, the mighty, the masters, the rulers, is worth mentioning compared to with what the Jews have done against them. The Jews, that priestly people in which the last resort was able to gain satisfaction from its enemies and conquerors only through a radical re-evaluation of their values. That is, through an act of the most deliberate revenge. This was only fitting for a priestly people with the most entrenched priestly vengefulness. It was the Jews who, rejecting the aristocratic value equation, good equals good equals noble, equals powerful, equals beautiful, equals happy, equals blessed, ventured in awe-inspiring consistency, so without logical contradiction, to bring about the reversal and held it into teeth the most unfathomable hatred, the hatred of the powerless, saying, only those who suffer are good, only the poor, only the powerless, only the lowly are good, the suffering, the deprived, the sick, the ugly are the only pious people. The only one saved, salvation is for them alone, whereas you rich, the noble and powerful, you are eternally wicked, cruel, lustful, insentient,
Mhm.
godless. You will be eternally wretched, cursed, and damned. We know who become their heir of this Jewish revaluation. With regard to the huge incalculable, you can't calculate it, disastrous initiative taken by the Jews with this most fundamental of all declarations of war, I recall the words I wrote in another occasion, namely, that the slaves' revolt in morality begins with the Jews, a revolt which has 2,000 years of history behind it, which has only been lost in sight because it was victorious.
Hold on. So
Yes, so that's okay. This is
Okay, so it's not as much racist as it is like because it is racist, but it's like, well, if you've got power, if you're
so he's
noble,
not.
you're
Yeah,
just better than.
he's not saying this. So like, I personally don't think Nietzsche actually hates. He doesn't hate Jewish people.
No, he's just using that as an example.
He just thinks that they're the reason why we have the morality we have today. This perversion of the original use of the word
But
God.
he thinks it's a perversion of morality.
It's definitely a perversion from where the word good started.
And morality is based on good.
Yes, we build a morality around what we think goodness is.
Okay.
In the same way we build ethics over the metaphysics of good. Right. Yeah.
I have a hard time wrapping my mind around this fool's definition of morality.
Well, his definition of it's the genealogy of morality here. Like if we look around, like when we think about what's good.
Well, I mean, I think about trees, right? What tree is good?
Yeah, but that's yes. So like the Aristotelian goodness is still here. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about the virtues of a man,
yeah,
we don't talk about growing into a strong oak tree. We talk about someone who is a servant, someone who goes out and spends their time doing philanthropy and being altruistic.
Yeah.
This was not how goodness was at the outset of the word.
And when was the onset of the word?
When was the outset of the word? I mean, in the West, we want to talk about goodness in terms of Aristotle.
Wasn't that a big aspect of the Greeks?
Yes, but that good is fulfilling your purpose. But fulfilling your purpose meant expressing yourself as strong when you're strong.
And Aristotle would have agreed with that?
Yes, 100%. Listen to the guy he's describing here. He's describing Alexander the Great.
His pupil.
Yes, his pupil. His number one dude, the guy who ends up sending, so many animals to him to start dicing up our biological system.
Yeah.
That's the reason why that's the reason why Alexander the Great really goes out and does what he does.
Yeah.
Because, at least in this interpretation of history, because it's not about being unegotistic. Alexander the Great needs to be egoistic so that he gives people an example of the kind of power you can have, right?
And that power would be good.
That power would be good, yeah. So, like, think about like the ultimate capitalist.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So Elon Musk is the ultimate good, right?
No, Elon Musk. I wouldn't say he's the ultimate. I think someone like Warren Buffett.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Right.
But that would be Nietzsche's.
So Nietzsche is not making an evaluation judgment at all. He's not saying this is actually good.
But he's saying this is what Nietzsche would say the origin of it was. And you
yes,
agree with
yeah.
that.
No, for sure. 100%.
We're not saying whether it is actually good, but that's
neither's Nietzsche.
Okay.
Neither's Nietzsche. But Nietzsche is going to make a prophecy from this, which we don't read. But we're going to see in a second. Okay. Okay, so the beginning of this flipping of values, he's going to call it the slave revolt. So then there's the aristocrats or the masters, and then there's the slaves. Okay.
Yeah.
So the beginning of the slave revolt in morality occurs when the resentment itself turns creative and gives birth to values. The resentment of those beings who denied the proper responsive action compensate for it only with imaginary revenge. So when these slaves can't in action go out and not become slaves, they just start imagining revenge.
Like people going to hell.
Yeah, like, oh, fuck you, dude, you're going to hell for treating me like this. And this is going to be that I don't know if this version says it, but this metaphysical revenge, right? Yeah, with imaginary revenge, right? The other translation I read out of, the one I actually know, right? This is that metaphysical revenge. Whereas all noble morality grows out of a triumphant saying yes to itself. So slave morality says no on the principle that everything that is outside or other, non-self, and this no is its creative deed. The reversal of the evaluating glance This essential orientation to the outside instead of back into itself is a feature of resentment. In order to come about, slave morality must first have an opposing external world. It needs, physiologically speaking, an external stimuli in order to act at all. Its action is basically a reaction. So the morality that comes out of the powerful, this comes from the powerful itself. It's not a reaction, it's an expression. But the slave morality is a reaction. It needs the powerful to inspire its creation. So Nietzsche is going to be calling the slave morality unnatural.
But if it's natural for people to be oppressed, then wouldn't it be natural for them?
Yes, but it's going to be a perversion, right? It's going to be a perversion of what really is going on. It's not like this story is not actually real. The Christ story is not real.
Okay.
I mean, according to Nietzsche.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Right, according
sure.
to Nietzsche, right? Okay. So, gosh dang it, where the heck am I? Pause it. All right, hey, we're going to take a second break. All right, so I should have found out where we were before I pressed on pause. It's basically a reaction. There we go. The opposite is the case with the noble method of valuation. This acts and grows spontaneously, seeking out the opposite only so it can say yes to itself even more thankfully and exultantly. This negative concept, low, common, bad, is only a pale contrast created after an event compared to its positive basic concept, saturated with life and passion. We, the noble, the good, the beautiful, and the happy. When the noble method of valuation makes a mistake and sins against reality, this happens in relation to the sphere in which it is not sufficiently familiar, a true knowledge of which indeed it rigidly resists. In some circumstances it misjudges the sphere it despises, that of the common man, the rabble. On the other hand, we should bear in mind that the distortion of which from the feeling of contempt, disdain, superciliousness, I think I read that correctly, always assuming that the image of the despised person is distorted, remains far behind the distortion with which entrenched hatred and revenge of the powerless man attacks his opponent. In effigy, of course. Indeed, contempt has too much negligence, nonchalance, complacency, and impatience, even too much personal cheerfulness mixed into it, for it to be in a position to transform its object into a real caricature and monster. Nor should one fail to hear the almost kindly nuances which the Greek nobility, for example, places in all words that uses to distinguish itself from the rabble, an act of sympathy, consideration, and indulgence incessantly permeates and sugars them, with the result that nearly all words referring to the common man are expressions for unhappy, pitiable, and on the other hand, bad, low, and unhappy, have even ceased to reverberate in the Greek ear in a tone which unhappy predominates. This is a legacy of the old nobler aristocratic method of valuation that does not deny itself even in contempt. The well-born felt they were the happy. They did not first of all to construct their happiness artificially by looking at their enemies. So remember, we're talking naturalists here. Which of these versions of good is the most natural? Because remember, we're talking about the origin,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the selflessness is not the origin of goodness.
Well, I
Right.
mean,
So he said,
when we're born happy.
yes, those that were born happy, which is not the common man. The common man has always been oppressed by those that rule it.
So is happiness the basis of where you can start to
That's how we called it good. So I was powerful. I could take what I want. I could do what I want. I went on adventures. Think of like Homer.
So you would have to be
Think
an
of,
outlier to be able to be happy from.
yeah, because otherwise you're a slave probably. You have no power in your life.
Mhm.
You're completely out of control of your life. Your life is determined for you. But the aristocrats, they choose the life they want because they're in a position to choose the life they want.
Okay.
And this position has been taken through power. Okay. Um, right. So the well-born felt they were the happy. They did not first need to construct their happiness artificially by looking at the enemies, or in some cases, by talking themselves into lying themselves onto it, as all men of resentment are wont to do. And also as complete men bursting with strength and therefore necessarily active, they knew they must not separate happiness from action. Being active is by necessity counted as part of happiness. So that going out and fulfilling your destiny,
Okay, so
right?
I'm thinking of I coach football. These
Right.
kids going out.
Yes, them going out and fulfilling your destiny as a good quarterback. What does that look like?
Mhm.
It looks like action.
Mhm.
It looks like having the ability to do what you're supposed to, express yourself fully, right? Um,
I see where you're coming from. I agree with them.
right, yes. Yes. So,
Bursting with therefore necessarily active. Right.
yes,
Being active
okay.
necessarily
Yeah.
part of happiness.
Yeah, very much the opposite of happiness at the level of the powerless and the oppressed and those rankled with poisonous and hostility feelings, for whom it manifests itself essentially as a narcotic and anesthetic, rest, peace, Sabbath, relaxation of the mind, and stretching of the limbs. In short, as something passive. While the noble man is confident and frank with himself, the man of resentment is neither upright nor naive, nor honest and straight with himself. His soul squints. His mind loves dark corners, secret paths, and back doors. Everything secretive appeals to him and as being his world, his security, his comfort. He knows all about keeping quiet, not forgetting, waiting, temporarily humbling, and abscessing himself. A race of such men with resentment will inevitably end up cleverer than any noble race, and will respect cleverness to quite different degrees as well, namely as a condition of existence of the first rank, while the cleverness of noble men can easily have subtle aftertaste of luxury and refinement about it, precisely because in this area it is nowhere near as important as the complete certainty of functioning of the governing unconscious instincts, nor indeed as important as a certain lack of cleverness, such as daring charge at danger or at the enemy, or those frenzied sudden fits of anger, love, reverence, gratitude, and revenge by which the noble souls down the ages have recognized one another. So taming your passion. Why is it so important for the priestly class to have a doctrine that teaches you to curb your passions and to suppress your instinct for adventure and the way you feel? And
Well, I don't know if they're asking for that,
no, yeah, but why?
but I mean,
I'm not
I
saying
can talk about.
why. No, but why do you think? Why do you think? So let's suppose
So
Nietzsche's
based on
right.
what Nietzsche's
Based
saying,
on let's pretend we're
why
Nietzsche.
do I think? Because, well, I mean, Nietzsche believes that those things are the things that give you power, right?
Yeah. So this is an expression of yourself, but there's some
So
lack.
everybody's expressing themselves, right? Then those who are noble, those who are Aristotelian, are going to have
Yes,
more.
they're going to express themselves in a way that suppresses the action of the common man.
And so
Right.
it'd be very visible of
Yes.
who is not good.
Yes,
and who is good.
100%. If I'm, the smallest guy in the room, if I'm the smallest guy in the room, I can't fight and I have the smallest stick, right? And I got this big guy in the room who does what he wants because I can't stop him.
Mhm.
And I have all these feelings of like these natural instincts in me, these passions,
But I can't express it.
but I
with
can't
my
express
words.
them. It makes me resentful. I hate that man.
Mhm.
Instead of me, being happy for them or recognizing him as an enemy, instead I hate him because he stifles who
Goes
I
back
would
to
like to
insecurity.
be. It's all insecure. I'm jealous.
Yeah.
I stifle these things because I'm jealous and I don't have the strength to express them freely.
Mhm.
Right.
Based on what Nietzsche is.
This is based on Nietzsche, right? Okay. Uh, when resentment does occur in this noble man, in the nobleman himself, it is consumed and exhausted in an immediate reaction, and therefore does not poison. On the other hand, it does not occur at all in countless cases where it is unavoidable for all who are weak and powerless to be unable to take his enemies and his misfortunes and even his misdeeds seriously from all. That is the sign of the strong, rounded natures with a superabundance of power which is flexible, formative, healing, and can make one forget. A good example from the modern world is Mirabeau, who had no recall for the insults and slights directed at him, who could not forgive simply because he forgot. A man who is like this shakes from him with one shrug many worms which would have burrowed into another man. Actually, love your enemies is also possible here and here alone, as assuming it is possible. There's a typo here, it looks like. On all earth, right? So when you have so much powerful, it actually then becomes possible to love your enemies. If I'm reading this
Because you're not
correctly.
jealous of them at all.
Yeah, you just shrug it off. Okay, brother, you hit me in the face. Yeah, GG's, dude.
Well, I mean, I think about
Yes. At this athlete, athletes is the perfect example. I actually always talk about LeBron after I get done reading with this.
Yeah, but that's LeBron's biggest thing.
Yeah.
So
So
that's why he isn't the good or the greatest, is because he allows others to affect him in a certain way.
right. Yeah, maybe he's not
Even
so
though
powerful.
he was given all of the
Right.
attributes to be the best.
Yeah, so for he insists on having his enemy to himself as a mark of distinction. Indeed, he will tolerate as enemies no other than such as having nothing to despise and a great deal to be honored. Against this, imagine the enemy is conceived by the man of resentment, and here we have this deed his creation. He has conceived of the evil enemy, the evil one, as the basic idea to which he now thinks up a copy and a counterpart, the good one himself. Right? Nietzsche has a really famous quote. We'll get into Nietzsche quotes after this. Let's finish this up. We're kind of close. Okay, but let us return. The problem of the origin of good is thought up by the man of resentment demands its solution. There is nothing strange about the fact that lambs bear a grudge towards large birds of prey. So I'll read it again. There is nothing strange about the fact that lambs bear a grudge towards large birds of prey, but that is no reason to blame the large birds of prey for carrying off the little lambs. If the lambs say to each other, these birds of prey are evil, and whoever is least like a bird of prey and most like its opposite, a lamb, is good, isn't he? Then there is no reason to raise objections to this setting up of an ideal beyond the fact that the birds of prey will view in somewhat derisively, oh gosh dang, this thing reloaded, and will perhaps say, we do not bear any grudge at all towards these good lambs. He called them good. In fact, we love them. There is nothing tastier than a tender lamb.
Oh shoot, that's like a back.
Yes.
It's like a backhanded love your enemy.
Yeah, I've never seen the word tender here. It is just as absurd to ask strength not to express itself as strength, not to be desired to overthrow, crush, and become master, to be a thirst for enemies, resistance, and triumphs, as it is to ask weakness to express itself as strength. I'll say it again. It is just as absurd to ask strength not to express itself as strength, not to be a desire to overthrow, crush, become master, to be a thirst for enemies, resistance, and triumphs, as it is to ask weakness to express itself as strength. A quantum force is just a quantum of drive, will, action. In fact, it is nothing but this driving, willing, acting, and only the seduction of language which construes and misconstrues all actions as conditional upon agency. A subject can make it appear otherwise. I know it's complicated. I'm going to read. This is really deeply metaphysical here, but I'm going to keep reading. As just as the common people separates the lightning from its flash and takes the latter to be a deed, something performed by a subject, which is called lightning, popular morality. So think about the morality we have today. We should give to the homeless, right? We should care for the weak. We should stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. Popular morality separates strength from the manifestations of strength, as though there were an indifferent substratum behind the strong person which had the freedom to manifest strength or not. So we get mad at the strong as if there was a difference between the exercise of strength and the strength itself. If you're really strong, you can't help but be strong.
Mm-hmm.
If you're weak, it's not in your cards.
You just are what you are.
You are what you are, in a way. I mean, he believes in overcoming, but that is a product of strength.
Of course. Right?
That's a product of strength.
It's like predestination.
This is why we love our enemies, because they move us to compete. Right. Let's see here. But there is no such stratum, there is no such being behind the deed, its effect, and what becomes of it. The doer is invented as an afterthought. This is super Aristotelian. The doer is invented as an afterthought. The doing is everything. Basically, okay, basically, right? The common people double a deed. When they see the lightning, they make a doing a deed out of it. They posit the same event, first as a cause and then as its effect. The scientists do know better when they say forces move, or force moves, force causes, and such like. All our science, in spite of its coolness and freedom from emotion, still stands exposed to the seduction of the language and has not rid itself of the chain links fostered upon it. The subjects. No wonder if enriched secretly smoldering emotions of revenge and hatred put this belief in their own use, and in fact do not defend any belief more passionately than that the strong are free to be weak, and the birds of prey are free to be lambs. In this way, they gain the right to make the birds of prey responsible for being birds of prey. When the oppressed, the downtrodden, the violated say to each other with vindictive cunning of powerlessness, let us be different from evil people, let us be good. And a good person is anyone who does not rape, does not do harm to anyone, who does not attack, who does not retaliate, who leaves the taking of revenge to God, who keeps us hidden uh, as we do, avoids all evil, and asks little from life in general, like us, who are patient, humble, and upright. This means if herd cooling and impartiality, nothing more than we weak people are just weak. It is good to do nothing for which we are not strong enough. But if this grim state of affairs, this cleverness of the lower rank, which even insects possess, has, thanks to the counterfeiting and deception of the powerlessness, clothed itself in finery of self-denying, quiet, patient virtue, although the weakness uh, of the weak were itself, I mean its essence, its effect, its whole unique, unavoidable, irredeemable reality. I'm going to keep reading. I'm going to finish this before we talk. And there's so much that we could pause at every sentence. A voluntary achievement, something wanted, chosen, a deed, and accomplishment. This type of man needs to believe in an unbiased subject with freedom of choice, because he has an instinct of self-preservation and self-affirmation in which every lie is sanctified. The reason the subject, so the difference between the doer and the thing he did, or as we collectively say, the soul, right? So we bring up the soul to make that distinction. Think about Aristotle. I think about Descartes. Has been until now the best doctrine on earth is perhaps because it facilitated the sublime self-defection whereby the majority of the dying, the weak, and the oppressed of every kind could construe weakness itself as freedom, and their particular mode of existence as an accomplishment. So good for you for just being this way, right? Man, it's really heavy, right? Since this thing is recorded, you guys like go back and like scrub back the last 6 minutes, or like re-listen to that, because that's really hard to just pick up in one go, right? So what's going on with this whole bird of prey talk?
I'm having a hard time tracking some of it. I'd have to go back and listen, but I remember one part that was really important was, those who are the bird of prey can choose to be weak, right? but those who are right, who
Right.
are the the weak, right, cannot choose to just be strong.
Right. 100%.
And that freedom, right,
Yeah.
that's freedom.
That's right. That is an aspect of being strong that you actually get to choose.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so let's back out and give like a bigger story here. Okay, um so moral atheism. Moral atheism. So real quick, I this text sounds really harsh, but Nietzsche has to be the most quoted philosopher in pop culture, period. More than Freud, more than Plato, way more than Aristotle, right? I like Aristotle too. So does Nietzsche. Um, so does Aquinas, surprisingly, right? It's funny how these things go together. Um, like quotes like, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." That's not Demi Lovato, right? It's Friedrich Nietzsche. Um, you can determine a man's worth by the enemies he adopts, right? So that pick on someone your own size sentiment, right? This is Nietzsche, um, right? Um, be careful when staring into the abyss. No, wait. Oh, wait. Oh my God. How am I messing this up?
He who has a why to live can bear almost.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Be careful. Wait. Say it again.
He who has he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow.
Right. This is a product of This is a strength talking. If you say like, be careful when fighting monsters, lest you become yourself. When you stare into the abyss, the abyss stares back into you. That scared the shit out of me. What was that?
That was my foot.
Oh, that was a chair.
When you stare into the abyss, yeah, the abyss stares back at you.
Right. Nietzsche, man, the amount of quotes you get from Nietzsche are humongous. Right? I mean, right. Um, Nietzsche, what we read sounds harsh, but let's think about this for a second. Right. Or better yet, Eddie, could you explain why, like, what sort of sentiments he's actually like, if his account of history is correct?
Mm-hmm. Where the good came from.
Yes, and I mean, when we have this lecture in class, and I'm actually like spending time with you guys in class, why it's so important to have school in person so I can press on you, right? Man, I mean, you got a lot of people say, yeah, this makes total sense, right? Um, and therefore, then they say it's true, but as you should know from philosophy, right, everything makes sense. You make sense of
Yeah, just
everything.
because something makes sense doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah, just because something makes sense doesn't mean it's true. Yeah, I mean, so let's do this.
But his only strength was his intellect, correct?
Nietzsche was actually let's dive into this.
Because if we talk about power, right, then we're just going to say, okay, who is the biggest,
Yes,
strongest,
so if you
most
wanna-
physically fit person?
if you guys, I'll upload a roasting of Nietzsche from Bertrand Russell, and it's really funny. And he says it's so funny because Nietzsche hates on women so much, but as Russell says, right, but most women would probably beat the shit out of him if they fought.
Yeah, I was going to say, like,
yes, okay, so Nietzsche's right. Nietzsche says Nietzsche is living. One is his father's a theologian. Nietzsche is an expert on religion.
But he's an atheist, correct?
Yes, he is an atheist, right? And he adopts this sort of Aristotelian view of material, matter, and form, right? But our real atomic property is not fire, whatever. It's not particles, right? So remember, particles are the words that we're using now at this time,
Yeah.
right? but instead the most basic element of life is a will to action. That Nietzsche has a really particular view of evolution. That evolution is, it's not a, so there's evolution like the Thomas Aquinas. So if you go back to argument 4, right? Or no, if you go back to the 5th argument, the teleological argument that we read last lecture, right? This is like the Aristotelian understanding of evolution, that things evolve over time because they have a design in place. So there's the teleological view of evolution, the telos version. Nietzsche doesn't believe in this one. And then there's the Darwinian version, where things evolve accidentally or passively. Nietzsche doesn't believe in this one either. In fact, he thinks the smallest piece of our ontology, the smallest thing that we have, is actually a will to action. And it's not just any action, but it's a will to acquire power. That power is the drive for all things organic to perform action. Everything in life is domination. Things don't evolve by accident. Things evolve to go out and conquer each other, and this is what's natural.
Is he saying that, like, Aristotle said that if you fulfill your potential, that's like...
It's not about fulfilling potential. It's about acquiring power. It's about dominating each other. This is really what life is. Life is about dominating each other. And this is how we use to talk about the word good. Good, Alexander the Great. Good was anything that led to power, that was the expression of the strong. And this was that way from the conception of the word in Greek all the way up until, well, the church came about. Until Christ came. And Christ, when the Christian ethic came to be, we had a flipping of values, exactly what we just read.
Yeah.
This was the first time in the West that being humble, being a servant, being meek, being celibate, taking rest, that this is what we meant by good. And the antithesis of this goodness is what we call bad. Well, as time goes on and when we come up to where Nietzsche's at, our view of God post David Hume ends up going away. Intellectual atheism has found its foothold. And our view of the word good still remains. When we talk about what good is in this I don't want to say modern. It's almost kind of postmodern at this time. I mean, even now, but back then, right? We think about the Christian ethic. When we think about what's good, we think about helping those that can't help themselves. But in the Nietzsche view, that's actually a robbery. You actually cripple people. He hates Christianity. He thinks that Christianity makes Europeans weak and fat. It makes us complicit. So if we look at evolutionary progress doesn't happen by accident. It's not an accidental reason that some traits go extinct in a species and other move on.
Based on
Yes,
attacking.
it's based on conquering each other. If you are weak, you die off, and then the weak compete with each other. And then one prevails as strong, the other becomes the new weak. Boom, it dies. A new strong gets produced by this other strong, and then we have a progress. We have a natural progress. This is the real drive of action behind life.
Mhm.
This will to dominate, and domination and competition, which competition, I mean like a competition to express the power inside of you, to self-express strength. This is how progress in life happens. And so Nietzsche ends up with a sort of a literary prophecy in a text called "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," and this small little German town, right? This small little German town. They're out. So I'm totally paraphrasing. They're out in let's say the evening time, right? And everyone's fat and having a good time, drinking, eating, and going on with their life, right? So think about how like a nice little village would be right now,
Mhm.
right? And some crazy guy comes out of the wood, and he starts waving his hands. And he starts freaking out. And he's like, "God is dead. God is dead. We've killed him. God is dead." And everyone's looking at him like, everyone kind of looks at him like he's kind of weird. And he starts jumping around even crazier. He's like, "God is dead. We've killed him. God is dead. We've killed God. And what is next is soon to come." And everyone looks at him with just like these blank stares, and they're just like blinking. And he stops screaming and he looks back at him and he goes, "You're not ready. This message wasn't for you." And he goes back into the woods. Okay. And this is supposed to be like a sort of analogy of what's happening. So in the intellectual world, we have completely killed our notion of God. Remember, God was in this slave revolt. God was the basis for this loving morality, for this servitude, this humble morality, this humble ethic. And so in the intellectual world, we've just said, "Oh, well, that's just stupid," right? We write it off because it's just easy to say. Nietzsche doesn't think it's stupid, right? He just thinks that it's wrong, right? And that it appeals to people because they think it's just easy to live that way than it is to actually compete with each other and become a hard ass. And so he says we've killed God, so we've killed our idea of God, and something bigger is going to come now. Someone is going to come along, and he calls this person the Übermensch.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, the Übermensch or the Overman. Yes, the Antichrist. The Overman comes, right? You guys can't read that. I don't know why I'm doing this. Right? The Overman is going to come, and he's going to see. And this is a paraphrase quote from Nietzsche. He's going to see that once you kill the God that ushered your values in, you no longer have a right to believe in those values. Once the God that brought these Christian values into the West has been killed ideologically, we no longer have a reason to believe in those values anymore. This is why he hates utilitarianism. Right? So utilitarianism is the view that we ought to that any decision is good if it maximizes the pleasure over pain for everyone considered. He goes, okay, that sounds like the golden rule, which is exactly what John Stuart Mill, right, the guy we accredit as being the main utilitarian, says, right, that this is actually what Christ is getting at, by the treat others the way you would like to be treated. And it's like, for what reason? It's more natural to compete with other people. And this is how progress is going to be. And this Ubermensch, this next man, this overman, is going to realize this, that he's going to be strong enough to realize that these ethics have no reason to be believed in, and he's going to become a natural man again. And he's going to compete with us. He's going to compete with us fat, lazy, atheist, Christian morality loving Westerners. And he's going to destroy us because he won't be fat. He's going to be a true competitor. He's going to F us up. Right? He refers to him as the blue-eyed beast. Right? So you can see where, yeah, you know where this is going, right? If you don't know where this is going, we'll shoot, right? Okay. He makes this prophecy. And the reason why we're called the Overman is because there's us here. So this is us. This is us as humans. This is the Overman. This is the thing that comes next. And he is the bridge between us and the beast that comes after us. And the Ubermensch is going to dominate us. And he's going to set what good is for himself. Right? So this character, the Overman, this is the most misunderstood villain in every freaking movie ever. Michael B. Jordan in Black Panther. No, not the Joker. Right. Dick Foley. No, just kidding. Yeah, Michael B. Jordan, the Black Panther. Right. He's what? He's trying to stick up for his people.
Yeah.
He said, "What? Look at the technology we have. We should actually be dominating these people." In fact, Superman, the Ubermensch, translates actually to the Superman more than the Overman, which is actually more that it means, right? But the Superman, like actually DC Comics Superman, is literally a carbon copy of Nietzsche's Ubermensch. He's so strong, and us as normal people being completely powerless against him, what do we do to Superman? We try to kill him. We hate the Superman. And the Superman doesn't get it. And the Superman has to what? Whoop our ass. Right? Luckily, right, we, the weaklings, we wrote the story. Superman dies. Right? But that's why Superman is so complex. He's misunderstood. He's literally, and this is where people who love Nietzsche actually claim that the Nazis are going to misunderstand him. Because he's not trying to capture some tyrant, so to speak. He's trying to capture this way that we're jealous towards each other. Think about what it's like next time you're in a room and everyone's singing happy birthday for you. Look around at people's faces and see who looks a little awkward, who can't take it that it's your birthday. And they get that weird feeling in their face, right? Or when you do something big, right? You sell $100,000 worth of Herbalife, right? And you tell your neighbors, I'm just kidding, Herbalife's a scam. Don't jump into Herbalife, ruin your life. Let's say you get accepted to, you do something big in a sport, right? It's the easiest one to talk about. And you tell your friends and your neighbors, and a lot of them get so uncomfortable over it. The fact that you've gone out and you've expressed the competency in you, it makes people hate you, right? Think back to the Apology, right? It's the same sort of thing. And Nietzsche he thinks Socrates is a dumbass. Um, yeah, this is the sort of thing he's trying to capture in life, right? Okay, so he writes all this stuff, right? He makes all these prophecies about what's going to happen. Yeah, he ends up getting really sick, and there's like a famous story that kicks off his sickness, his mental illness. He was 68. Uh, okay. Oh, when he was 44. Yeah. Okay. So he actually, man, it's actually really sad. Um, he's walking down the cobblestone street, and for any of you guys who know anything about horses, like in Europe, or in like big cities like New York or whatever, horses that spend most of their time walking on concrete, they die. They die much faster than those that are out like in the wild running around, or not in the wild, that are kept in fields and stuff, right? And they die. They're exhausted. Their legs give out. They have to be put down. Right. Nietzsche sees a horse who's collapsed on the floor, and the owner of the horse, the guy who's working the horse, ends up taking his little stick and starts beating the horse and screaming at it to get up. Nietzsche sees this and has like a weird breakdown, and he runs over and he covers up the horse, like begging the guy to stop beating. And the horse is just on his side crying, and the guy's just and Nietzsche's just he just starts crying to stop and he tells the horse, "I understand you." Right. And if you think about that for a second, there's something that is really deep and sensitive here. That this creature who, if it wasn't for us not being able to do what the horse could do, that horse would be out experience, like think of the cheesiest scene in like running across the field, right, with all his buddies, right, having horse, adventures. Yeah, like his life has become a dungeon because he does what we can't, and this is the sort of sentiment that Nietzsche scholars really take Nietzsche to be trying to get across. That those of us who are weak, where we end up becoming the deepest haters, right? And that, yeah, it's true in a lot of ways, right? It's true in a lot of ways. So Nietzsche goes crazy. Once that happens, he starts going down this. He starts getting really sick. He ends up going crazy on his deathbed. His sister sells tickets to him going nuts, and kids are coming in there giving her money to see a crazy guy go insane. After he dies, she takes his writings. We don't know what she changes. Some speculate that blue-eyed beast talk about the Ubermensch is actually her editing the text. I think that's wishful thinking, but I'm not an expert on this, right? Um, she takes this to what eventually gets called the Brown Party in Germany. Yeah, eventually known as the Nazi Party, right? And the Nazis get a hold of it. I mean, the German intellects get a hold of this at the time. And coming off the back of World War One and depression, European depression, especially in Germany, um, this sort of anti-Semitism gets birthed. Yes, this supremacy gets birthed. Yes, that look at, and if you look at German science, Germany, right? Germany has always held a place in Europe as scientific, as the scientific leaders, right? Um, yeah, they ask themselves, well, okay, so why are we being held back, right? And they go to war, right? They set out to become those people. They set out to become kind of like Alexander the Great, except, well, they think that they're going to trim the fat off of human civilization. That they're no longer going to give a platform for the weakness. They're going to go out and start competing with people, and this is how progress gets birthed. But here's the crazy thing: the Nazis, when they put our Christian ethics to hell, right? When they kill God, so to speak, they move our science up 100 years in just a few years. Our advancements in physics, in rocket science, think about pesticides, medicine, biology, psychiatry, um, all of our sciences. Like, if it wasn't for the Nazis, we wouldn't have swimming pools the way we do. The Central Valley would not be a thing that it is now because the agriculture, right? The amount of science, the amount of progress, tangible progress that gets made because they're trying to compete with the world, and they do away with this Christian faith, with this Christian ethic at least. It's actually a bit prophetic on Nietzsche's end. The biggest problem is though Nietzsche actually hated the Germans, right? He actually thought the Ubermensch was going to come from Poland, which is not why I'm wearing this, right? This Polish jersey. This is actually in solidarity with the Poles that got dominated in World War II. Actually, I just happen to be wearing it, but like, um, Nietzsche would have hated the Germans because their war was fueled off of resentment. That resentment is actually a manifestation of weakness. Its weakness manifests itself. Like you said, right? The birds of prey don't hate the good lambs. In fact, they love them. They're the most tender meat, right? And so, yeah, it's yes, Nietzsche hated socialism. This is what he didn't get about. I mean, the real father of contemporary utilitarianism was actually Jeremy Bentham, who was actually a major advocate. He was an economist and a major advocate of capitalism. He thought it was the most equitable system for everybody. Um, he hated Christ because Christ was a socialist. Not that capitalism isn't Christian, right? But he viewed Christ as a socialist, and he thinks that socialism is, well, yeah, it's there just to compensate for weakness, right? Yeah, Nietzsche is definitely a capitalist. Um, yeah, so okay, this whole class has been like, how do you know things? This has been a class about epistemology, right? What do you guys think about this story, right? So, you know what? Without me answering this question, I want you guys to imagine how David Hume would view this question. I'm actually pretty sure I know how he would answer, but I think that there's a Humean critique that steals justification from this story, right? Um, and it has to do with, well, do you really think you can read the intentions of people 2,000 years ago when I can look at Eddie right now and not know what the fuck he's thinking, right? If cause and effect aren't actually something in the world, like Nietzsche wants to say, right? Well, how on God's green earth can he really psychoanalyze the causal powers between the Jews and their behavior, right? That's a tough one, and that should be said in a way that you guys probably won't understand in the first place. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, probably next week I'll go through some actual questions about this text, but yeah, so that's a three. Anything to say, Fredward?
No.
You want to massage on camera? No, just kidding. This guy tries to always beat my ass. All right. See you guys.